California fires have made their way back into the headlines over the past couple of days because on one hand, the fire captain in San Diego, someone who helped battle these wildfires, was found dead inside of her home, and investigators believe her wife killed her, and now her wife is on the run, and there is a massive manhunt to find her. And then, on the other hand, we all saw this coming. The mayor of LA, Karen Bass, finally fired the fire chief of LA, Kristen Crowley. Now, you might remember that shortly, I don't want to say after these fires because the flames were still burning, but shortly after the news broke about these fires, rumors were spreading that Karen Bass was going to fire the fire chief, Kristen Crowley. Now, they tried to shoot down these rumors. They did a little joint press conference pretending that they had each other's back and that they were going to stand together. But in reality, the rumors were true. It's just before Karen Bass could officially fire Kristen Crowley, she started getting all of this public backlash, so she decided to not fire her at the moment. She decided to wait a few weeks until the California LA fires were out of the headlines. She waited until people moved on and weren't paying attention anymore to go ahead and finally fire Kristen Crowley. And this is something I warn you guys about all the time when it comes to these tragedies and these catastrophes, if you will, these disasters. Accountability, no one ever wants to take accountability. And by the time you hear any of the results from the investigations that they do, it will be years down the line and people won't care anymore. Just like this, we didn't have to wait years. We just had to wait a couple of weeks before Karen Bass tried to basically use the fire chief as a scapegoat to take all of the blame. Hey guys, well, sorry about the fires that burned down half of LA. I fired the fire chief. End of story. There's the conclusion. Now listen, I'm no fan of Kristen Crowley. She obviously was putting DEI and sexuality and gender first and safety second. There are videos of her all throughout the internet. I've already shown you some talking about her diversity hires, and there's certain quotas that she was trying to meet, hiring more, people from the alphabet community and more women and stuff like that. So she was all with DEI. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend like all of this is her fault. Because if the fire chief goes, you want to know who else needs to go? The mayor. Mayor Karen Bass. At the end of the day, Mayor Karen Bass and you know who, I don't even hardly want to say his name, but Gavin Newsom. Those two are the main people responsible for why these fires happened. Yes, I do put some of the blame on Kristen Crowley for sure. But she isn't in charge of a lot of the funding and stuff that is coming in. And she had been ringing the alarm for a long time that they did not have enough money. They did not have enough funding. All of the woke politics and the woke policies and nonsense that they were doing in California was crippling their fire departments. And that's why they couldn't adequately, properly respond to these fires. Okay? If the fire departments were properly funded, properly staffed with people who actually knew what they were doing and not diversity hires, the fires would not have been as bad as they were. There is no excuse in the year 2025 for those fires to be as bad as they were. But you all already heard the horror stories. I don't want to go over them again. Fire hydrants with no water, water reservoirs that were totally dry. They're trying to save this fish or they're trying to do this for the environment. And then it turns out that those decisions made entire communities burn to the ground. But before I rant even further, I want to go ahead and roll these clips. Let's hear a little bit more about what's going on. Let's listen to Karen Bass try to ditch all of the accountability onto this fire chief, and then I'll be right back with more thoughts.
That the chief said that she would honor my request, a request that we put in from day one regarding the Pacific Palisades fire as to what happened. Questions from residents, from our viewers, asking specifics about the response to the fire. The chief said, come on down and I will tell you everything. Chief Crowley was transparent. She was honest. She was open.
You've spoken with the Fire Commission. You have made it very clear that this department is underfunded, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
This department was asked to take a $17 million budget cut.
That is correct.
How does that affect your department?
It impacts our ability to provide service. Absolutely.
How did that affect the firefight in the Palisades and beyond?
So, first and foremost, what I just said before is making sure our firefighters have the ability to provide service. So, $17 million cut did not allow us to do what we needed to do. And where that impacted us specifically for Palisades was our ability to move into reserve apparatus. The $17 million cut into our ability to utilize resources that should be at our disposal that we were unable to fix because the funding was not there because of cuts to our mechanics.
What type of apparatus are we talking about specifically?
Mainly fire engines and ambulances.
NBC4 wanted to see if that was actually true. News Chopper 4 flying over LAFD fire stations, and we did find those ambulances, fire engines, and other apparatus that the LAFD tells us they cannot operate because they do not have funds for mechanics to come and fix them. And as sources inside the LAFD explained to me today, imagine the frustration during the Palisades fire when they called in firefighters from around the nation and around Southern California to help them in the firefight, but they did not have engines and ambulances and other mechanisms, machines to put them on because they didn't have them. So,
good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Acting in the best interest of Los Angeles public safety and for the operations of the Los Angeles Fire Department, I just met with Chief Crowley and removed her as fire chief. I have appointed a 41-year veteran of the fire department, former Chief Deputy Ronald Villanueva, as interim fire chief. He is respected and ready to hit the ground running. So let me be clear. Our firefighters acted heroically during the Palisades fire, and they act heroically every single day. That is without question. Bringing new leadership to the fire department is what they and the people of Los Angeles deserve. As you know, I have called for a full investigation of everything leading up to January 7th. A necessary step to the investigation was the president of the Fire Commission telling Chief Crowley to do an after-action report on the fires. The fire chief refused. We all know that 1,000 firefighters that could have been on duty on the morning the fires broke were instead sent home on Chief Crowley's watch. These actions required her removal. Let me just say that yes, as the mayor of the city, the buck stops with me. I am in charge. However, the person in charge of the fire department, as I mentioned before, whenever there was a fire emergency, a weather emergency, or a hint of a problem, I am contacted directly, and not just by Chief Crowley, but by any of the heads of the departments. As you know, we have over 40 departments.
When I talked about it with the fire chief, what she said is that we have warnings of Santa Ana winds a lot, but predicting this, and you saw, from the city, from the county, that level of preparation really didn't happen. So it didn't reach that level to me to say something terrible could happen and maybe you shouldn't have gone on the trip.
Why didn't it
But to
happen?
me, I don't know. I mean, I think that that's one of the things we need to look at. So 2 investigations are taking place. One internal to the city, and that's the Fire Commission, because That's mandated by the city charter. So the commission will hire an outside entity to examine everything, the pre-deployment, why were firefighters sent home, all of that should have taken place that didn't. And then also the governor has contracted with the Fire Safety Research Institute, which is a national institute that investigated what happened in the fires in Maui. So everything that happened, including that, needs to be examined. But I will tell you that I felt absolutely terrible not being here for my city and not being here for my family.
Look, I'm just going to be completely honest because most people will refuse to be completely honest with you when it comes to this story and this situation. The people in California, and everywhere else for that matter, need to stop voting for people like Karen Bass. It's that plain and simple. I don't even have to hear a single word come out of her mouth. I can take one look at her and automatically realize that I would never vote for her. Okay? We need to start being more honest with ourselves. Okay? And if you're honest with yourself, you're not going to vote for someone that looks and acts and talks like Karen Bass. Okay? Look throughout history. Look at the strong leaders throughout history. Has there ever been a strong leader that looks and acts and talks like Karen Bass? No. Has there ever been someone who successfully ran their community or led their community that looks, acts, and talks like Karen Bass? No. So we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to stop doing this identity politics. Okay? I want to be inclusive, so I'm going to vote for Karen Bass. Does Karen Bass look like a leader? Does Karen Bass look like she should be leading anyone, let alone LA of all places? She doesn't. And the sooner we're honest about things like that, the sooner we can repair some of the damage that has been done to our communities and our country overall. Okay? You can take one look at the woman. You don't even got to know her politics. You can look at her and you can tell that's not a leader. That's not a leader that we need leading our community, leading our city, leading our town. Never in the history of history has anyone like this ever successfully led anything. Why would we start now? Why would we believe that this person is going to do a good job? And like I said, we got to ditch the identity politics because at the end of the day, it's meaningless. The fire chief of LA, she was hired to be the first LGBTQ fire chief of LA. It's such a big deal, and she's a woman. That's the cherry on top. It was all about identity politics, but the moment the fire chief stepped out of line, the fire chief had to go. The fire chief got fired. And that's what people need to realize. People like Karen Bass, they exploit identity politics. They tell you that you need to vote for them, care about them, listen to what they have to say because they're part of this group or that group. They're a woman, they're a minority, they're this, they're that. But in a moment's notice, these same people that want you to sympathize with them and support them because of their sexual and racial identities, in a moment's notice, they will turn on anyone, regardless of sexuality or skin color, if that person happens to step out of line. Kristen Crowley was the biggest ally you could think of. She was at all of the pride parades, front and center with the fire department. She was the greatest ally. That's what they call them, right? Allies. She was the greatest ally of all. Her only mistake, listen, she was a woman. She was gay. She was this. She was that. She checked all of the boxes. Her only mistake was that she was truthful for about 15 to 30 seconds on the news. Nothing more, nothing less. Kristen Crowley didn't sit down for a 4-hour podcast to expose everything that was going on in LA, to expose all the problems with the fire department and all of the problems with the funding? No. Kristen Crowley answered a couple of questions truthfully. She stepped out of line and told the truth momentarily. And immediately, she got the axe. They wanted to fire her right there on the spot, but they knew it wouldn't be a good look because of the pushback they got. So, like the cowards they are, they waited a few weeks to do so. And now Kristen Crowley is finding out the hard way that the identity politics that she was playing around with, it doesn't work anymore. You can be as gay as you want to. You could be double or triple the woman. You could have every disability in the world. You could be whatever. It doesn't matter. The people that pretend like it matters, it doesn't matter to them if you do not go along with their way of thinking, if you don't go along with their narratives. If you start being truthful and step out of line, they will axe you in a moment's notice. And that has been put on full display in California today. I want to read this quick little statement from Rick Caruso for you all. For those of you all who might not know, Rick Caruso actually ran for LA mayor against Karen Bass and lost. And many people say that, hey, if Rick won, these fires would have never have happened, or at the very least, they wouldn't have been as bad as what they were. It is very disappointing that Mayor Bass has decided to fire Chief Kristen Crowley. Chief Crowley served LA well and spoke honestly about the severe and profoundly ill-conceived budget cuts the Bass administration made to the LAFD. That courage to speak the truth was brave, and I admire her. Honesty in a high city official should not be a firing offense. The mayor's decision to ignore the warnings and leave the city was hers alone. This is a time for city leaders to take responsibility for their actions and their decisions. We need real leadership, not more blame passing. And that is all Karen Bass is doing, is blame passing, not taking any accountability. If you watch her closely, she gets attitudes. Kind of pops her mouth, pops her tongue, rolls her eyes, and rolls her neck. All of the characteristics of someone that should never, ever have any position in politics. She's been doing all of that, taking no accountability at all. And I promise you, she does not care. Like, sometimes you can tell that politicians are putting on an act about how much they care, and they really don't care much. Karen Bass doesn't put on an act. It's blatantly obvious she does not give a damn about anything that happened. In fact, she feels like everyone else is wrong for putting any blame on her. Everyone else, they're all big, bad, and racist and stuff for putting any blame on Karen Bass. But you see, this Rick Caruso dude, he actually owns like some shopping malls and plazas, I think, in the area where some of these fires took place. And he hired his own fire team to come out there and fight the fires. And somehow, even though everything burned down around him, this guy and his fire teams managed to save his brand new shopping plazas and centers that were just built. So a lot of people are saying, hey, if this guy was actually leading LA, he would have made the proper decisions to make sure that many of these places didn't burn down. I mean, on a smaller scale, even without the help of actual, firefighters, him and his private little teams he hired managed to put out all of the flames and keep his shopping centers basically untouched and unscathed as everything else burned down around them. So we got a small little sample size of how Karen Bass handles the fire and how Rick Caruso handles the fire. All of Rick Caruso's buildings and shopping centers are all perfectly fine because he handled it the right way. Meanwhile, everywhere else around it burned to the freaking ground under the leadership of Karen Bass. So It's a small example. I understand that protecting a shopping center is different than protecting, the whole of LA. But on a smaller scale, we got to see that Rick Caruso is a more effective leader than anyone else in California right now, I guess. Because Gavin Newsom is a huge failure. Karen Bass is a joke that shouldn't even be in her position. She is a DEI hire. And slowly but surely, people are realizing that DEI hires bring a lot of death with them. Especially when you put them in prominent roles that they have no position being in. Or they have no business being in, I should say. So that's where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. No surprise here that the fire chief was fired. I'm not going to sit here and cry over it. I'm not that upset. The only thing that I'm upset by is that a lot of this blame is being put on the fire chief and not Karen Bass, when it should be the other way around. If anyone lost their job today, it should be Karen Bass, not the fire chief. But if you ask me, both of them need to go. But for now, you guys let me know what you think of this down in the comments below. While you're down there, hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe, ring that notification bell, and I'll talk to you all very soon in the next video.